we're a morph crazy, hobby now. I mean, everyone wants to see what the latest morph is. And my belief, I wanted to just get your philosophical belief on something. Do you believe that we live in an intelligent universe, or do you think we live in like a random universe that just things happen because the atoms collide in a void?
I think all evidence suggests the latter, not the former. That much of life and success, and particularly in evolutionary terms, is largely luck. Did the situation changes, and if a beneficial mutation that helps an organism cope with that change occurs within enough time, they adapt. If it does not, they become extinct, and it's kind of a random roll of the dice. There's been a lot of really successful animals that went extinct. The key to extinction and survival seems to be being generalists versus specialists. Animals that become too specialized, can be a very good way to make a living for a short time, but as soon as that dynamic changes in any way, they can't cope with it fast enough, and they tend to become extinct, whereas generalists are more adaptable. It's why you don't see, in North America, we don't have any short-faced bears, the largest bear that ever lived.
Yeah.
We don't have those anymore. We don't have a lot of things anymore because the things that they ate became extinct. They couldn't eat smaller prey. They went away when all of their prey went away.
But when we domesticate animals, Nick, it seems like all of a sudden this huge variety of color palettes become available that we almost can't fathom where they can. Look at ball pythons and reticulated pythons. Look at the betta fish, the Siamese fighting fish. I look at some of these colors, compared to when I was a kid when they had, blue and red. I mean, it's almost unfathomable that, where did this come from? It's like we're almost like our will to want to see these morphs have actually made them come into being almost.
In large part, that is true. There's a little more to it at the biological level. The longest running scientific experiment in the world was started in the Soviet Union, and it's still continuing to this day, like 60 or 70 years. And they wanted to study how humans domesticated wolves and made wolves into dogs.
Right.
So they started with a completely wild canid, a fox, which they were already breeding for the fur industry even back in the Soviet days. Mm-hmm. So they started domesticating these foxes, and what they found is that certain characteristics we associate with dogs are the result of adrenal gland output. Wild animals have a higher adrenal gland output. It increases their fight or flight response and their survival odds. Domesticated animals, when we domesticate a species, one thing we are, whether we consciously do it or we unconsciously do it, we are selecting for mellow, tame, workable animals.
Right.
Those animals invariably have lower adrenal gland output, and what the Soviet and Russian experiment showed was that when adrenal gland output falls below a certain point, color and pattern mutations start popping out.
Really? Interesting.
In particularly piebald, there's a strong correlation between piebaldism and lower adrenal gland output.
Wow.
Now, if you think of any domesticated animal you can even imagine, they always have white patches. They are all piebald. Think of every dog you've ever seen in your entire life. I couldn't think of a dog that didn't have at least some white patch.
Yeah.
All of that is piebaldism, and they're the same with their floppy ears and their tails that curl over. All of that comes about at lower adrenal gland output in canids.
Interesting.
So these mutations popping out in captivity anyway, it's partly because we are domesticating them. And in ball pythons, they're essentially completely domesticated. Another line of evidence for that is that one of the other hallmarks of domestication is easier and more frequent reproductive events.
Yeah.
Wolves only produce 1 litter of pups a year. Dogs go in to eat twice a year. Mm-hmm. I have seen ball python. I have a friend that bred a male ball python that was literally 3 months old. 3 months. And it weighed 250 grams. I think 247 grams at sire to clutch. That is not natural.
Right.
To be 3 months after you leave the egg producing offspring, that's clearly a domesticated.
Right.
It used to be, I remember in ball python, I remember when they were hard to breed.
I remember when they were hard to keep alive.
Yeah. Now we've just engineered them to be better captives. Now they require no temperature cycling. They're effectively non-seasonal breeders, and they'll breed at ridiculously small and young ages with no external stimulus. But 20 years ago, that was not the case.
Yeah.
Some of the carpet python lineages are getting to that point. Boa constrictors, some of these long-running species people have been working with for a long time are starting to get there, where sometimes I get younger guys in the hobby now, trying to tell me how it is. And they're like, oh, you don't need to cycle your snakes. You don't need to do all that. It's like, but these dinglings don't really realize like that the goalpost has been moved. The reason why it's easier now is because of all the guys in, 10,
Right.
15, 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
Every generation of captive breeding further down that track you get, those goalposts get a little, you just don't need to, they move, and it just gets a little bit easier until eventually they will just be non-seasonal breeders as well. I'll just do it whenever.